right, as always, please go out to the P drive for the class, as you can see up on the screen here. And there is a folder out there with today's date on it. So copy the folder 02/05/2015 to your virtual desktop and throw it into your, and actually, let me change that. Just grab the CH08 folder. Alright, copy folder CH08 to your virtual desktop, C:\xamp htdocs folder. Give you an idea of what's going on here for the next at least couple weeks. We're going to go over Chapter 8 today, probably as the last few lectures have been, take around an hour. Alright, then starting next week, please, if you get a chance, at least page through Chapter 9 in the book. Chapter 9 is building a content management system, and it uses PDO, and it uses object-oriented PHP, etc. My guess is, my hope is, that between next week, so the week of the 9th, and the following week, the week of the 16th, we will be done with both Chapter 9 and Chapter 14. After we're done, if that's the case, on around the 18th, 19th, whatever that is, we're done with the book then. Okay? Then what we will do starting the following week for 2 or 3 weeks is we're going to work on this project for which I asked you to create that thing out there with put your favorite movies on it, etc. So that's what we're going to be doing. And how long will that take? I don't know. It may take until we have our break. Okay? And a woman came in here this morning. I don't know her name, but a very nice lady. She teaches something here. And I've seen her here before, and she asked if she could have some paper. Well, the reason I'm telling you that, you probably could care less, but what is it? We're right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks from Monday. Okay, so we only have, I think, 4 more weeks. The week of the 9th, the 6th, no, 5 weeks. The 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, and the 2nd. 4 weeks after this week, then we have break. Alright, so it looks like we only go 8 weeks, and then we have break. Because she told me, at least, that the break was the week of the 9th. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm going to believe her. Alright? So, looking at it, that it'll take us 2 weeks to get through, 2 weeks to get through Chapter 9 and Chapter 14, and then probably close to 4 weeks to get through this project that we'll be doing. Alright, that says that the last 6 or 7 weeks of the class, you'll have just to work on your projects. Alright, what I have to do is just give you that, like I did in the Joomla class, give you like a 1-page thing, just asking you to write something down as far as what you're doing your project on. I should do that very soon, maybe even today. Alright, and the reason for that is, before I know it, 4 weeks from today, I'll have to have midterm grades in. Alright, so I'll make sure that you have done that, and at least done a first rough draft of what you're going to be doing, and all that'll have to be handed in by the time grades are due. Alright, I don't think it'll be an issue for the other 2 classes. You should have all gotten an email from me, any of you in here who are in the field study / internship class should have gotten an email from me yesterday or the day before on your BTC email that said by the 9th week you are supposed to make sure you send me a copy of your resume and a copy of a cover letter that you've written. And I'm going to, if you've already done it, fine. But if you haven't done it yet, please do it as soon as possible. Some of the people in here I've worked with individually on at least trying to fix up your resume. Again, you may think I made it worse instead of better, but at least I was trying to fix it up. Alright. So, what's in Chapter 8 are a bunch of assignments. Just so you know, if I go out to, I'm not going to, but if I went out to the P drive right now, as he oftentimes does, Ullman has got his all kind of balled up, so I grabbed the individual scripts and basically stuck them in their own folders, because I thought it would make it a little easier to understand. The other thing that's in there is, other than the folder that says CH08, the one I asked you to copy over, is another folder called PDO. Alright? And it's got some PDFs in it, and it's got some different stuff on PDO. But one of the things that's in there, it's a little bit dated, but this is an ebook I found online under that IT-ebooks. It's called Learning PHP Data Objects. So literally what it is it's a 185-page primer on the use of this. Again, it's old. If you saw the date when I whizzed by it, 2007. All right. So the other thing, just so you know that, I put some URLs in here. And this one I may have even put out here. I don't know. No. But some other good references on PDO, PHP data objects, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There's a crash course. This is the actual manual, the PHP manual that talks about PDO. That's always the best resource to go to. All right. Some woman had done this big PowerPoint presentation on PDO, and that's out there. So I stuck all this stuff out there if you've got an inkling to read it. So that said, again, as I mentioned, we've now gone through chapters 1 through 7 in here. So all those are done. We're going to go through chapter 8 today using existing classes, and then chapter 9 starting next week, and chapter 14. Again, I am not going to go over chapters 10, 11, 12, or 13. Not that they're not well-written, good chapters. We have to draw the line someplace and give you time to work on this stuff. All right, it can't just be a lecture class, and that's the last thing in the world I want, is for it to be a lecture class. Again, hopefully at least all of this stuff that's in here is going to work. I brought it all, I tested it all last night, and everything that I could see that was in there appeared to work. All right, so if you're following along in the book, I'm on page 243. All right, chapter 8, using existing classes. And let's not even read any of this over here. Let's just look at this. All right. So the chapter is broken up into 4 different sections. The first is on simple exception handling in PHP. The good news is we don't have to spend much time on it because, guess what? It's try-catch. It's very similar to the stuff that we've gone through in other classes. Then they talk about extending the exception class, very similar to what we did back in chapter, I think it was 11 or something like that, in the Java class last semester, where you wrote your own exceptions. All right. Then, and it's not a real huge section, it's only about a dozen pages or so, as you can see. That's the using PDO stuff. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Finally, the using the standard PHP library. And they actually tell you how you can kind of shell out from PHP and call some C functions. All right, so I'll just leave it at that. All right, so the first thing that's discussed in here then is catching exceptions. The author mentions a bunch of stuff I've already told you about what an exception is. All right, and that's fine. I just want to mention a couple things that are on this page, and the first one is, if you look right at the top of the second column there, the author mentions one benefit that exception handling has over the conditional is that it separates functionality from logic. If you don't know what that means, then you really don't have that great of an understanding of what model view controller is. And if you don't have a really great understanding of what model view controller is, that's because the lunkhead who tried teaching it to you didn't do a good enough job. So what he's going to do next week, starting next week, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on it, not in this class, but on the actual iPhone class, okay, the iOS class, is we're going to talk about model view controller. And we're going to, as I told you before, we're going to build this calculator. And we're going to build it, not just build it, we're going to build it about a dozen times. The good news is, as we go in there and we start making changes to it, the changes that you'll make will be very superficial. All right, so I hope to have about the first 6 versions of that done by next week. And we're going to start on that. Then we're going to go in and say, okay, what we've done is we've basically taken just about everything and put it in like view did load. And that's not really a good idea. So let's talk about how to separate that stuff out. In other words, how to separate the view stuff from the logic stuff from the controller, the controller stuff. All right, or the view and the data in the controller. And that's what we're going to get into after that. All right. So it says exceptions are thrown using the following syntax. So you can throw exceptions. You can also catch exceptions. And in fact, you do this inside of a try-catch loop as shown down here. Now, the author says The basic syntax for this is try, catch, and it says that's a more sophisticated version of this. This is one time I'm not going to exactly agree with Ullman. He knows a heck of a lot more about this stuff than I do. But to say that try catch is a more sophisticated version of if else really sells try catch short. Try catch is designed to work with object-oriented programming languages, all right, which are designed to throw exceptions when something goes wrong. So he really simplifies it, and in my opinion, simplifies it a little bit too much. All right. So then he mentions here in this table that you see on page 245 that the built-in PHP exception class has a lot of different exceptions that you can check on. I'm not going to go over any of these. Instead, I'd like to go over the examples that he puts here. All right. So the example here starts on the bottom of page 245, and this is unfortunately one of those that continues on to the next page, so I'm going to bring it up here. All right, so this is the first example that he has up on the screen. What is it, 54 lines? Yeah, looks about right. All right, so this is class write to file. Okay, I'm just going to go over the code that's in here, and hopefully at least it will make sense. All right, so what he does is he creates a class called write to file. Okay, makes sense. All right, then he says, okay, we're going to have a file pointer. Isn't exactly like a pointer that you have in C, but just imagine that what you have, imagine what this is, for lack of better words. This is going to sound like what I said for pointers, but it's not exactly the same thing. All right, because PHP doesn't directly support pointers. All right, but imagine that you had a whole bunch of mailboxes, and one of them said file on it. Then this variable that you have right here is going to point to that mailbox. Hopefully that makes at least a little bit of sense. All right, and right now it doesn't point to anything, so we're setting it equal to no. Okay, then we come in here and we write our constructor. This should be code that really makes sense to you, and honest to goodness, it should be. And what it's saying there is, okay, what I want to do is I want to pass a file into my constructor. And if either the file doesn't exist, or if what I passed in wasn't a file. So let's say somehow I passed in something that was garbage. All right, if either one of those happened, then we're literally just going to throw our own exception that's just going to put up on the screen, the file does not exist. That's all it's going to do. All right. Now you might say, well, that's not a great use of error handling. It is a use of error handling and exception handling. All right. Then we're going to attempt to open the file. This says if I can't use the file pointer to open the file, and I want to open it with write permission, if I can't do that, throw that exception. Now think about why this one wouldn't happen. I already mentioned it to you. Either there is no file there, or I gave it a wrong path, or I spelled the file name wrong, or for some reason it's not a file. All right? Or you can't open it. It's not a text file. Then that's going to throw. If this, why would that happen? Well, I'm attempting to open the file, and I'm attempting to open it up in write permission. Does that make sense, looking at it up there? What if I don't have the authority to open it up in write permission? It would be like you trying to open up a file. Maybe you've done this before. In fact, most of you probably have. You know, especially the first semester you were here. You grab something and you open it right on the P drive, and you made a bunch of changes to it, and then you tried to write it without saving it to your desktop. And it doesn't work because you don't have the authority to write to the P drive. There are certain drives at Blackhawk I don't have the authority. I don't even see them. All right. So that's the constructor. And then all we're doing right here, now we're saying again, we want to confirm that we were able to do the write. If we couldn't, the F that you see in front of there, F write, etc., and you'll see this a bunch of times, F is short for file. All right, we're attempting to write to the file. If we can't do it, throw an exception that says we couldn't write to the file. Does everybody see this? Everybody see that @ sign right there? And you see it's there, and you can see it there. And I guess that's the only two in here. The reason that you put that @ sign in, and we actually did talk about this a little last semester, that @ sign is the error suppression character. And what that means is, if you have errors when you do this, PHP itself naturally throws errors. It puts them on the screen. We don't want those to show. We only want our error to show. So what we're saying here is suppress any error that you might have PHP show, and just show mine. All right. Then we attempt to close the file. All right. Then we attempt to call the destructor. All right. So this basically says make sure the file's open, and if it is open, close it. All right. And this right there, hopefully it makes sense to you. That line that you see down at the bottom here, line 51, that line right there, that's calling this thing. Does that make sense to people? Because you're going to see a bunch of this in the coming weeks, just so you're aware of that. All right, so I'm going to come in here. Nothing happened. There is no file by that name, and it didn't even throw the exception. All right. I'm going to show you in just a second when we bring up this one, and we're going to call this write to file, and it says the data has been written. This is the end of the script. And the reason that that'll work, so you know, the reason that that'll work, hopefully I'm going to try to break this right now. I'm literally going to try to break this. And I'm hoping it does break. It was looking for a file called data.txt. I changed the name from data.txt to data.xxx. I just threw some letters on it, .txt. So you can see now it says the process could not be completed because, all right, and we put that in there, and then we didn't suppress, and we let the error show us that. All right. And again, if I'm saying this and it's not making sense, all I can tell you is you got to read the chapter. I think he did a pretty good job of explaining this. I'm sure better than I do. All right, so he explains everything that's happening in that particular example on pages 245, 246, 247. All right, and again, we just went on and we looked at the second script, and that's on 247, 248, 249, and 250. It's the same script as the previous one, but this one, basically, again, you just saw this, that it didn't work. Whoops, sorry. You just saw that this didn't work. You got an error message. And the reason that didn't work is the file that we've got out here isn't called data. It's called data.xxx. All right? So now notice, if I run it again, the data has been written. This is the end of the script because it was able to find it. So it looked to see if I had a file that was named data.txt. If I didn't have one, and you already saw that, what happened? It gave me an error. All right? And then I went in and changed it back so we had a file named data.txt. Now I'm wondering here if we do this, because I don't know if this is going to work or not. So I'm going to try something else here. Why did I get an error there? I have a file. It's called data, but I changed the name from data.txt to data.bitmap, and I did that on purpose. So what I've just shown you here, okay, is, okay, when we ran this, if the file didn't exist, you got the file does not exist. If it wasn't a text file, you got the file does not exist. All right? And once you do that, if you couldn't open up the file, so if we put a read-only permission on there, let's see if we can do that. Anybody remember? Mike, do you remember how I can make this file read-only? Read-only, thank you. We'll see if that works. So I tried to make it read-only. Now, if that worked, then the error that should fire is this one, because I'm trying to open it up with write permission. All right? Could not open the file. Yeah, it's still the data.txt file, and that that wouldn't matter because it's read only anyway. All right. All right. So what I've shown you here are several different examples. Example 8.1 and example 8.2, and it got us up to about page 250 in the book. Yes. Right, he's not using try-catch. So now he said, let's extend it and let's talk about try-catch, because this is starting to be a pain because with all these ifs in here. All right? And notice what he mentions. So, again, this should look really, really familiar to you because that's exactly the way we did it in Java. Class followed by the name, extends, exception. And as soon as you do that, you can catch as many of these exceptions as you want to. So he talks about writing your own exception handlers, in other words. All right. So the next thing, starting on 252, talks about extending the exception class. All right. And what you should see in there, this extends exception. So now notice what he's doing. This is pretty cool, because what he's doing is he's saying, okay, what I want to do basically is get a code sent back to me, and based on the code, I want you to show me which of these is the problem. No file name was provided, file does not exist, not a file, not writable, invalid mode. These are all ones I've shown you already. All right? Data could not be written, file could not be closed, no further information is available. Then they've got their right to file here. And again, he goes through and he checks all this. If the file's empty, all right, if the file doesn't exist, etc. Okay? So what we could do would be to come back then to the next example, which is script 8.3. Okay, and I believe 8.3 was the only one. I don't know why, but I'm looking at it. It appears as though no, it actually is there, but I think it's this one. And I could be wrong. Yeah, there it is. So I should have put that into its own folder, and I didn't. So really, I should have made another folder here. I'm trying to figure out why I would have done that, but I didn't. So that should have been script _08 _03, and I should have dragged that one in there. And then I should grab that file again, that data file, copy that, and put that in there. And then I'd have to go through all the same rigmarole that I just showed you. In other words, I'd have to come back here and run this, and now I'd have to choose, instead of 8.2, I'd have to choose 8.3, and the right to file. Okay? And right now, I haven't synced it up. But I could do the same exact stuff that I just showed you. All right? All the author is showing you in this particular example on 253 and 254 is you can check for all sorts of different problems. All right? And as you might have guessed already, if I come through here and I Google PHP exceptions, I'm willing to bet you that the first thing that's going to come up is the manual page. There it is. All right? And there's a lot more. Notice how long this thing is. All right? So there's a lot more information on that. Yes. Yes. Bless you. And yes, and you can write them in separate files. You can include it in the same file. The problem that you get when your programs start getting more complex, because your question's a really good one, is the fact that once these programs get more and more complex, sticking everything in one file really becomes a pain in the butt. All right? And hopefully I'm finished. I was working before class. I was working on that target heart rate, actually getting the app, the Android app to work. And I don't know if it works yet or not, because I made some changes to it and I ran it a bunch of times, and then it looked better in portrait mode, so I stuck it into portrait mode only. So this is what you're going to end up seeing this afternoon. Okay, the question was, let me try to rephrase your question and then try to answer it, okay? The question was basically if you had specific exceptions to specific classes, could you write specific PHP files or whatever, Java, whatever it happened to be for that class? The answer is yes, you can do that. Ideally, though, if you write a lot of programs that are very similar in nature, you'll start to create yourself an exception library, and you'll have more generic error messages where you can pass that, and then you just append onto that the actual error message that the system gives you. All right? And the idea behind that is, well, if I've got a class I'm writing, let's assume, for example, I'm doing some stuff for reservations. I'm writing a reservation class, and I do it for a hotel. All right? And I write these really cool exceptions. Now, after I've done that, they're real happy with it, and they tell the local rent-a-car agency. And they're like, wow, we could use that too. But if I take my exceptions and I make them so that they're so specific that they just talk about hotel reservations, I'm not going to be able to use it for my car reservation without making major changes to it. So I'd probably just make generic error messages and then append onto the end whatever the system gives me. All right. Yes. You'd have to have a require statement. All right. Yeah, you wouldn't want to include in there because if you're going to be throwing exceptions, you'd want that to be a require. All right, that gets us all the way into page 258, talking about PDO. All right, and I put a note here, and of course I didn't do it, so I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to add one more file to this particular folder, and don't worry about copying it or anything because it's literally going to have like 3 lines in it. And this is right from the book on page 258. We're going to go over what it means in just a second, since it's a small program. Make it a little bigger. And as they put in there, I'm going to put print _r PDO : get available drivers. I don't think I spelled anything wrong there. All right. So I'm going to do a file. I'm going to do a save as because right now it's a text file and I don't want it to be a text file. All right. to save it here as PDO test.php. All right. Now that should be correct. And I'm going to run this. Okay. So right now it's saying it looks like the only thing that this is, the only two things, the only two languages that are being supported here in the version we have are MySQL and SQLite. Now, there are other drivers that you can get. You can get a driver for Oracle. You can get a driver for SQL Server. You can get a driver for Excel. Because the idea that everything that we've been doing thus far with all the database stuff has been MySQL something or other. So that means it only works with a MySQL database. So if somebody came up to you and said, well, I've got SQL Server. All right. What PDO allows you to do, unlike the MySQL stuff, is you can write PDO commands and you can use them with any database for which you have a driver loaded. Does that make sense? And not just databases, but things like spreadsheets. All right. So it says at the time of this writing, PDO works with MySQL, Postgres, SQL, SQLite, Oracle, SQL Server, and there's a lot more. And it works with some non-databases too. All right, so I just ran that to confirm what we had. So what he tries to give you in about a dozen pages or so, starting on page 258, is a real short little primer on what this is, how you use it, and why you'd want to use it. And he uses a little bit of PDO, I believe, in Chapter 9. And in the example that I give you, well, when I first wrote it, I wrote it in MySQL, but I'll see if I have time, if I can rewrite that using PDO. All right. So, first thing he talks about is connecting to the database. In fact, I'm going to jump back and forth, and sorry about that, but let's see, is it 7? This is how you create a PDO connection, right there. I'll make it a little bigger. All right. What we're used to doing is setting up a regular MySQL connection. This is creating an object, a PDO object. The first thing that you have to put in there is the type of application you're using. All right. And they mention in the book that's referred to typically as the DSN, or data source name. Okay. And that is a combination of that, followed by the name of the database, DB name, and then the actual name. This should look familiar to you. We're running everything from localhost. We're running it as root, and we have no password. All that stuff should make sense to everybody because it's all stuff that we've looked at before. All right? But again, the advantage that you get from this, and this is what I want to make sure you at least hopefully start to understand, is all of the stuff we have done previously only works with MySQL databases. This will work with any database for which you have the associated driver loaded. And drivers for this, in many ways, they're like print drivers. You know, if you don't have a driver for your printer, you can typically go out to the internet and load one. All right, if I wanted to, you know, I should be able to come out here and do this. So what did I say? SQL Server PDO driver download. All right, notice it pushed me over to here. Well, I'm looking over here. Download Microsoft drivers for PHP for SQL Server. You'd have to download it. I'd have to look, but there is a place inside of XAMPP someplace where you'd have to put the driver. So I'd have to find out where the other one is and then add this one to it. Once we did that, when we went back and we ran that little mini program before, when we ran that little mini program that came back and said that the only thing that we had available to us, boy oh boy, was SQLite. All right, so when we ran this thing, then it would add more to it. All right, so there would be, we've got 0 as MySQL, 1 is SQLite. If we put SQL Server in next, it would be 2, SQL Server, etc. But they're free, and you can download them. And the reason that you might have to do this is, I mean, think about this. A lot of times, either a company gets so big that it's in different branches in a lot of different places, meaning that typically they're going to have a lot of different people in charge, or the company gets so big that they start acquiring other companies. All right, we all know cases of stuff like that happening. So if you've got one company that's doing their work in MySQL and another one doing it in SQL Server, you can make them talk. It's not an issue, but you do need PDO in order to do that. All right, and that's what the author's getting to in this part of the book. And if you look here, the last one that he has, that's kind of a, not the last one, but number 1 here, ODBC. All right, which is, I think it's open, but I think it's open database connectivity. That'll handle anything that's typically not handled by a database. All right, the ODBC stuff, just so you know that. All right, there's a good chance that when you try to do a PDO connection, if you screw it up, it won't work. So as mentioned here on page 259, you'll typically put this inside of an exception handler. It just makes sense to do that. So the author says, let's put all this together and start creating a script. What they're doing, you may or may not remember this, but back in chapter 1 or chapter 2, we had kind of a dorky little database called add task. All right? And now he goes back to that same database, but he connects to it, and he connects to it here. He connects to it using PDO as opposed to the way we did it in the past. All right, he hasn't really changed a whole heck of a lot of the functionality of it, all right, but that's what he's doing here. So he explains how he's doing this, how to use PDO on pages 260 and 261. Then on 261, he says, well, let's execute some simple queries. All right, and this is where the stuff gets a little bit different. You have to see this, and again, this isn't the kind of thing, it would make no sense to say, oh yeah, you got to learn this and you got to memorize it. No, it's all a matter of when you do this stuff, getting some experience doing it. All right, the first is the exec. You may or may not realize it, but think about this, okay? This is something we talked about a year ago in the 152-147 class, the Relational Database Development class, and we talked about data manipulation language. And we talked about insert, update, and delete. Okay? Everybody cool with those? Okay? Those 3 things allow you to either add something to a database, remove something from a database, or change something that's in a database. Would you all agree with that? But if you run yourself an insert command or an update command or a delete command and it works, usually you'll get an answer back that says something like 1 row's changed. You won't get data back. You'll just get a message back telling you that it worked or it didn't work. So when you have things for DML that you're using that are not select queries, you use the exec method in order to do these. All right, and that's what he talks about in here. On the other hand, when you want a select statement, you use query. Once you start using these, this is kind of a good page here on 262, because notice what he says. Using row count is like using MySQLi num rows. I would put money on it. I'm not going to do it right now, but I would put money on it that all this stuff that you see here, all these associated PDO commands, somebody has been smart enough to put a chart out there that explains how you go from MySQLi to the associated PDO one. Someplace out there has to be a chart that shows that. Now when you do this, hopefully this stuff that's in here makes at least some sense. Whoops. When you grab your information, you do what's called a fetch. All right? This should look real familiar to you because we've done stuff like this before. And what that says is give me my information back, but make it an associative array. So the key is the name of the field, and the value is the value for that key. This one says, rather than giving me field names, just give me an indexed, a numbered array. Okay? What's new are these two. Because what you can do is you can grab your information from a database and throw it right into a PHP class. And in order to do that, you need the fetch obj or the fetch class. All right? And that's what the author talks about here. Again, this is unbelievably heavy stuff. It really and truly is. All right? And as far as I could tell, at least, these all worked. All right, so the last ones that we did in here, like 8.8, no, that's not it. Let's see, must be 8.7. Add task. So I can come in here and run add task. There it is. There's my tasks. I just threw a couple garbage ones in there. All right, so I can put a task in there. Let's just say debug Android. All right, what's the parent? All right, do Android homework. So I'm going to make that the parent. I'm going to add the task. Boom. All right, the task has been added. You go, that's fine, Jeff, but I don't believe you. All right, so I can come out here now. That's because I didn't type it right. And somewhere over here, at 10:48 and 59 seconds, that's the task that I just put in. All right, but all I wanted to show you was I did the same stuff we did back in Chapter 2, but now the interface hasn't changed. But now we've done it using PHP PDO, or PHP data objects on our back end, as opposed to MySQL and MySQLi on our back end, which is what we've done previously. So that's what he goes through on 264 and 265. All right? Two more things, and then we're finished with the chapter. First one, and this is probably the most important part of this lecture, is right here on page 279. He talks about prepared statements. When you have prepared statements, when you write queries, what ends up happening is you get to specify the data at runtime. When you specify the data at runtime, you can be very, very specific on how you want it presented. By using prepared statements, you are able to get to pretty much eliminate, all right, a lot of the SQL injection that you get without them. All right, and I think I told you this before, but I'm going to say it again. It was 5 years ago. When the school sent me to San Diego, I went to a PHP conference, and that's where I got PHP certified. All right, and in the afternoon of the last day, there was a guy there who was like, "Why use PDO?" And I thought, that sounds interesting, and I'd read a little bit about it, but didn't know hardly anything about it, so I thought I'd go. And it's funny because I got there probably about maybe a half an hour before it started, and there was no one there yet. That was good. Why? Because I counted, and there were 36 chairs in there. And my guess is there were between 4 and 5 times that many people. Literally, one of the hotel guys came back and said, we better hope that no fire marshal comes because what we're doing is illegal. And they didn't have another room to put them in. The reason I'm telling you that, though, is that's how big of a topic this stuff is. People want to know and want to be able to have different relational database management systems talk with one another. And this is a way of doing it. Not only that, you can write code in such a generic way that if you do change from one relational database management system to another, the changes that you'll have to make are minute. Sometimes you won't have to make any. And when you use these prepared statements, what you end up doing is a lot of this. Email equals question mark, and pass equal question mark. And the reason for that is you're telling it to go out to the database at runtime and find the email address that you gave them and the password that you gave them, or whatever it happens to be. The point is, when you use these, you end up using question marks most everywhere. And he goes through an example of that here, starting on page 267 and going on to page 268. And this was 8.7. All right? And you already saw that. That's the one I ran for you. So it worked. Not only that, he even does a little bit, not much, but a little bit on the bottom of page 268. There's some error handling. With a try, it's all in a try block, and there's a catch. He doesn't do much with it. He just tells you that an error occurred. All right, and the last thing that's discussed in the chapter on the last 7 or 8 pages talks about using the standard PHP library. And I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't know this. I don't know if any of you did. PHP was written in C. Okay? What that means is, if it's the equivalent of being in Windows and shelling out to the operating system to do something, whatever that something happens to be. In much the same way, in your PHP code, you can shell out to built-in C routines. And why would you want to do that? Because a lot of times calling a C routine as opposed to a PHP one, since the C one is actually closer to the operating system, it'll operate faster. So what he shows you in these last half dozen or so pages in here are some of the things that you can use. All right, he talks first about the session handler interface class, but then he goes and throws this all at you. What this can end up doing, and what this ends up doing in the last example that he puts in the chapter, on the one on page 272, and then it ends on 275 and 276, all right, is he says that by using this stuff, you can pretty much eliminate the need for try-catch. Okay? Now, and this is the last thing I'll say, because that's all I wanted to say about it. I'm going to show you this afternoon. I'm going to draw this quickly on the board. But what I'm going to show you this afternoon is I went back to that target heart rate monitor. And first I did go back and finish writing it as an applet. And what happens here is it says age, and it's got a little box here. And then it says max heart rate, and it's got another box here. And then it's got min heart rate range, and it's got another box here, and it's got max heart rate range. So if I put in 58, and let's say that my maximum heart rate that I should have, let's just say, is 180 beats per minute. All right? And let's say the minimum range should be, let's say, 60. And the maximum should be, we'll put it 185. Does that make sense? Well, the problem with this, as it's written right now, is I can put something in there that's non-numeric. I think you'd all agree with that. And what I decided to do was, for writing it for the Android app, I could have just left it in there like this. I could have left it in there like that, and I could have put in a non-numeric keyboard. I'm sorry, a totally numeric keyboard. So the only thing you could have put in was numeric. Still have a problem is, what if I put nothing in there and try to run it? I can still get an error. So the way that I went around that was I used a slider. Seek bar, whatever you want to call it, a seek bar. All right? And worked with that. The advantage of doing that is, as long as that's set and it's always going to have a value, I don't need try-catches anymore. Does that make sense? It's got to be a number. It may not be the number I want, but it's got to be a number. And that's the equivalent of what we're talking about in here. By being able to shell out and call some of these C routines, you can be virtually guaranteed that what you want to have happen will happen. And that's what he talks about here on page 271 all the way through about page 280. He talks a little bit about iterators, and an iterator is just something that allows you to go through a list. All right? And the program that he has works with employees, okay? And we will talk more about auto load, but just not right now. All right? But again, as far as I know, everything that's in here works. Now, show you real quick. I am done, but I just want to show you this. When we get to Chapter 9, when we do get to that point here, because I have just started working on Chapter 9, but when we get to that point, there is no Chapter 9 right now in your stuff. There will be, but there's none in there now. All right. Notice this is the project that he has put together for chat. This is the content management system that he's put in here. Right now, notice that an error exists because I've got to go dig through his code, and everywhere where he puts in username and he sets it to username and he sets like password to password, etc., I got to find all that stuff and change it. So right now you don't have that, but what you should have, hopefully, by the time we come in here on Tuesday, is all this will work. Some of this stuff is dummy stuff, like this, that, doesn't go anywhere. It's just some dummy stuff that he put in here for show. And he also threw an image in there, etc. But what we're going to be concerned with is this stuff, because that's what the end of the chapter is about. So that's the index page. All right, right now that's not implemented. There's a contact page. All right, notice it says it's not found. We're going to fix that. It's got a login page, and it's trying to find it, but it's not doing anything. And it's got a register page. So hopefully we're going to start and go through that code, and I'm going to walk you through what he's done next Tuesday, next Thursday, and if necessary, the following Tuesday. Then 2 weeks from today, then we would go over Chapter 14, which is on unit testing and some other kinds of testing. Then we're done with the book. All right? And I'm done.